It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. Turmoil and tear gas in France as protesters and police clash on May Day, with nearly 300 arrested and over 100 police officers injured. Here, the nurses warning they could keep striking until Christmas, but a pay deal for NHS workers tomorrow is now described as a foregone conclusion. As the exits from Sudan close with more than 2,000 people evacuated by the UK government, we hear the anguish of those on their way out.
I'm thankful for the opportunity to go back home, but I'm not number 48, I'm Mishka, Doctora Mishka.
It's great to be home, says Donald Trump, as the former US president flies in to open another golf course in Scotland. Coronations then and now, we speak to some of those lucky enough to have been part of Queen Elizabeth's crowning. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's coming up in our press preview from 10:30. Hello there, good evening. May Day is a traditional date for people to take to the streets of Paris, but today saw hundreds of thousands out across the country as demonstrations were turbocharged by the protest against President Macron's pension reforms. There were violent clashes between protesters and police in the capital, leading to 108 police officers being injured, including at least one seriously hurt by a Molotov cocktail. 291 people have been arrested nationwide. Well, our Europe correspondent Adam Parsons joins us live now from Paris. Adam.
Yeah, it is amazing how quickly this city gets back to normal after a day like this, but this was a tumultuous affair about violence and conflict around Paris and indeed on the very street corner where I'm standing now. And it was built on various ingredients: a May Day protest, another national strike, a demonstration here attended by over 110,000 people. A small minority of those who had come to incite violence. A third element, the police, who said that they would be harsh against anybody who tried to disrupt this demonstration. And finally, a lingering sense of anger and grievance among the French people at the pension reforms brought in by their president, Emmanuel Macron. Put those together, and what Paris and France ended up with was a volatile cocktail that ended in fury and violence. Paris reverberated to the sights, sounds and smells of conflict. More than 100,000 people took to the streets in this city. The annual demonstration to mark workers' rights, this year peppered with political fury about pension reforms. This was the 13th in a long line of protests. There were constant battles with the riot police, who snatched targets out of the crowd and used tear gas relentlessly. And in return, they were attacked constantly. Here, an injured officer carried to safety, one of more than 100 hurt across the country. In Lyon, cars set on fire. There were running battles in other cities. The protest was everywhere, enveloping the country. And the focus of all this anger was the president, Emmanuel Macron, who's overridden Parliament to push through his reform programme, opposed by the great majority of his nation.
He won the election, yes, but is he still legitimate? And is this reform legitimate? I don't think so. No, there's different ways for people to express their opinion, and the street is one of them.
The violence was mainly instigated by the so-called Black Bloc, groups here simply to incite conflict. Here, smoke billowing from fires started deliberately at Place de la Nation, one of the city's main gateways. Well, these May Day protests in France are often combustible, volatile and violent affairs. But this year's one is different because there's a focal point to all this anger, and that is Emmanuel Macron. Macron's opponents have always alleged he is aloof and out of touch. Now the criticism seems endemic, even among those who voted for him. Macron can see, hear and sense this fury, but he's showing no sign of changing his mind. His hope is that all this will dissipate. But this is an angry country. Reconciliation won't come easily. Well, the scars are still around Paris. I just looked down at my feet and found this, which is a lump of the street that was chipped away in order to be used as a projectile to throw at police. There was significant clashes right here on this corner earlier. I saw a man being hit by a rock that had been thrown from the crowd. We saw police pushing protesters to and fro and grappling with each other. The simple question now, though, is how does France move on from this? Because, of course, as we said in our report, this wasn't isolated to Paris. This was across the country. Hundreds of people have been arrested, about 100 of them here in Paris. The remainder, though, the majority, around the rest of France. And the battle will continue, the political battle. We see no sign, I don't think, of Emmanuel Macron backing down. Remember, he's in his second term as president. He doesn't face a re-election campaign. So to an extent, he doesn't have to worry about a popularity contest going forward. What about the reaction of trade unions? Well, lots of people we spoke to said we need to carry on with this. We need to continue with our protest. Trade unions will in fact meet tomorrow to discuss what their next steps will be. But there is a certain deadlock here. Macron says France cannot afford to not put up its retirement age. Many people in these streets say that that is unacceptable and that he is defying democracy.
Adam, updating us there from the streets of Paris. Thank you. Well, meanwhile, thousands of nurses in England walked out today as part of their dispute with the government over pay. The head of the largest nurses' union told Sky News that the disruption could continue up until Christmas if the government doesn't offer a better pay deal. Well, the offer currently on the table then is a 5% pay increase and lump sum offer of between £1,655 and £3,789 this financial year for NHS workers in England. So far, the Royal College of Nursing and Unite members have both rejected that deal. However, it's being backed by some of Britain's largest unions, including Unison and the GMB, as well as the Royal College of Midwives and the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy. Those unions represent a majority of the workers. Tomorrow, the unions will meet NHS and government representatives to discuss the offer, which could be imposed by the government if a majority vote to accept the deal. Gurpreet Nawan reports.
It's May Day and workers are making their voices heard. Few are louder than NHS workers.
Counting just on my salary, definitely I can't afford many stuff. I have my daughter and family to support, so I don't go around to pay for the holidays.
1, 2, 3, 4. More nurses on the floor.
For the first time, nurses who work on cancer wards, A&E and intensive care have joined the walkout. The government has offered them and other NHS workers a 5% pay rise, but the Royal College of Nursing says it's not enough.
We want to address recruitment and retention within the NHS and particularly within the nursing workforce. And unfortunately, 5% is not going to be able to do that.
Come on! Come on! The dispute rumbles on, and in the meantime, patients are losing out.
Unless I have the operation, it's unlikely I will live to the end of the year.
Sue has a blocked artery, but her operation has been repeatedly cancelled. She's among more than 500,000 patients who have seen their vital medical appointments delayed.
I had a phone call on Friday to say we're on a go for Monday, today, and 4 hours later, they phoned me up and said we have to cancel Monday because of the nurses' strikes. So, you know, it's just a waiting game at the moment and hoping that I stay alive.
For people like Sue, the outcome of this negotiation is life-changing. The latest action comes ahead of a critical meeting between NHS bosses, health unions and ministers where the latest pay offer will be discussed. However, the nurses say they don't need to wait for the outcome of that. They already know that the offer isn't good enough. and they've rubbished any suggestions that they're acting prematurely.
How do we work? Fair pay. When do we want it? Now.
So while the Royal College of Nursing warns defiantly that strike action could last until Christmas, health unions are expected to approve the government's offer tomorrow. That means members could see a deal they rejected imposed on them.
The question is whether all the unions will tomorrow accept this deal and we can move on. But as I say, that will still leave major issues the government needs to address in terms of staffing in the health service.
So, for all the clamour, a deal with health workers seems closer than ever. Gurpreet Narwan, Sky News.
Well, our chief political correspondent, John Craig, joins us now from Downing Street. So what should we expect tomorrow then, John?
Of the end for many of the strikes in the National Health Service, some of which have dragged on for about 6 months. But the Royal College of Nursing is going to go down fighting. Now, tonight, Pat Cullen, the General Secretary of the RCN, has issued a defiant and angry statement saying that tomorrow's meeting with Steve Barclay appears a foregone conclusion. Now, she says that different unions and different professions came to different, and she says, respectable conclusions on this pay offer. The deal being accepted by others, she says, does not alter the clear fact that nursing staff, as the largest part of the NHS workforce, remain in dispute with the government over what she calls unfair pay and unfair staffing. So tomorrow, around about lunchtime, there'll be a meeting of all the union representatives before they go and meet the NHS bosses and government officials. And the reason we seem to be heading for a breakthrough, which of course the Prime Minister will welcome as he tries to get waiting lists down, is because the numbers stack up like this. Now, the group that's called Agenda for Change, that's the representatives of all the various health unions, is like an electoral college. And the RCN, which is what is going to reject the offer, has 9 votes. But Unison, that is going to accept, has 12. The GMB accepting has 3. Midwives, 3. They're accepting. Unite, 4, but they're rejecting. Now, Sky News has calculated that it's about 25 for accepting the offer votes and about 17 for rejecting it. So the signs are that there will be a vote to accept the latest offer. Of course, NHS bosses have for weeks been pleading with the government to solve these strikes because, of course, it's one of the Prime Minister's 5 priorities. And the NHS bosses have been saying to ministers and the Prime Minister, how can we get waiting lists down with these strikes going on? Well, tomorrow we are likely to see a breakthrough. And the numbers suggest that the majority of those voting at the meeting with the government will vote to accept the offer. But the RCN are going down fighting, defiant and angry. They're saying that their dispute with the government still goes on, even if the pay rises are imposed.
John, live there in Downing Street. Thank you. To Sudan now, and fierce battles and air raids are reported to be continuing in Khartoum despite another supposed ceasefire being in place. Tonight, the Foreign Office here has confirmed that 2,197 people have been moved out of the country in what they claim is the longest and largest evacuation from Sudan by any Western nation. Additional flights took off earlier from Port Sudan, giving British nationals perhaps their last chance to leave the region where the situation is clearly deteriorating. The United Nations Refugee Agency says around 73,000 people have already left the country and that the agency is planning for a total of 815,000 to potentially leave. Our correspondent, Yusra El-Bahir, reports now from Port Sudan.
Jamal Hashallah.
It's the last leg of the longest journey of their lives, and they anxiously wait for their names to be called. British evacuations continue. And everyone here is a British citizen who's leaving someone behind.
Evacuation flights have basically moved from Wadi Sidna and Durman in the capital to here in Port Sudan. So everyone you see here has made a very long journey by car over a day to get here and get home to Britain.
For those being evacuated, there's a lot of relief, but the process is bittersweet.
Like, I'm thankful for the opportunity to go back home, but I'm not number 48, I'm Mishkat, Doctora Mishkat, you understand? I feel very selfish and privileged. It's like a mix between guilt and relief to be on this flight, to be fair.
Waiting at the same airport are those left behind. After a Turkish evacuation plane came under fire landing north of Khartoum, this group of Turkish students and residents were relocated to Port Sudan Airport. They've been sleeping in the mosque for the last 3 nights.
Now we contact them and they said it's a safe place here, but there is no plan coming from Turkey.
Büyükçelik pazar akşamı vatandaşları tahliye etti ve kimse bizimle iletişime geçmedi ve kaderimiz bilinmiyor.
What do you have to say to the Turkish government?
Türk büyükçenin bizim hakkımızdaki nihai tutumunu netleştirmesini talep ediyoruz.
And this man, an Egyptian in exile, has limited options. He can't go back to Egypt or any other country in the Middle East.
اعتقال مباشرة شكله عامل ازاي بقى وصعوبته عاملة ازاي يعني مفيش حد مش عارف شكل الوضع في مصر ازاي.
And now they're off to Larnaca, another step away from Khartoum and one stop away from the UK. Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky News, Port Sudan.
Investment banking giant JP Morgan is set to take over the troubled US bank First Republic in a deal brokered by regulators. The bank is the third major US bank to collapse in the last few months. JP Morgan has agreed a deal with regulators to acquire the substantial majority of First Republic's assets. President Joe Biden has sought to assure Americans of the steps taken by the regulators and said the nation is well on our way to stabilizing the banking system.
These actions are going to make sure that the banking system is safe and sound, and that includes protecting small businesses across the country who need to make payroll for workers and their small businesses. And so let me be very clear. While depositors are being protected, shareholders are losing their investments. And critically, taxpayers are not the ones that are on the hook.
A woman believed to be in her 30s has died after being stabbed in South London. The Metropolitan Police said it was called around 4 p.m. to reports of a stabbing in Stockwell Park Walk. Officers, paramedics and an air ambulance attended. The woman was pronounced dead at the scene. A number of roads are currently closed with a cordon in place. A number of people have been killed and dozens left injured in car crashes along the 55 interstate in Illinois during a dust storm. Roughly 40 to 60 passenger cars and several trucks were involved in the crash. The Illinois State Police spokesman said 30 people have been transported to local hospitals with injuries. One of the world's most important fossil deposits has been found in Wales. The discovery includes fossils of many soft-bodied creatures which are extremely rare and were found near Llandrindod Wells in Powys. The fossils were in rocks which had been laid down under the sea over 460 million years ago at a time when what is now mid-Wales was underwater. Well, these pictures show them imagined as living creatures. It's hoped they will provide a new insight into how life was evolving at that time. It's nearly a century since Donald Trump's mother emigrated from Scotland to the United States. But the former president declared it was great to be home when he landed in Aberdeen today. He's visiting one of his eponymous golf courses in a break from campaigning to re-enter the White House and fighting charges of falsifying business records. Our Scotland correspondent Conor Gillis saw him arrive.
Wherever he goes, the cameras, the controversy and the circus follows. A performance with a former president, the star of the show. Donald Trump is back in the UK for the first time in 4 years.
President Trump, how do you feel to be back in Scotland? President Trump, are you here to escape your troubles at home?
It's great to be home, he said, a reference to his ancestral roots on the same week as the King's coronation. This is a personal rather than political trip for Donald Trump, arriving here in Scotland at a time when he becomes the first US president in history to be facing criminal charges. It was the moment Trump, the businessman, arrived at his nearby golf resort. Time to forget the trial he faces over alleged hush money payments.
My mother was born in Scotland. She loved Scotland, was a great admirer of the Queen, and I got to know the Queen so well on my trips to Scotland and to UK generally, but I got to know her. She was an incredible woman. My mother loved the Queen.
But the warm welcome does not extend too far. This the message to a president from some of his Aberdeenshire neighbours. Was he welcome here or not?
No. To be honest with you, the first time he came, you know, he just caused so much problems. He forced people out their houses.
Don't see the problem with Donald Trump being here. A businessman brings a lot to the community. And
you've got the hat for it as well?
Yes, I've had this hat for 6 years, so I've always been a supporter.
Here is Trump at his other resort in Ayrshire a few years ago. A Scottish business empire facing financial problems. The latest accounts revealing £4.4 million losses.
I think this is part of sort of separating his political ambitions. This is more focused on his business ambitions and trying to revitalize these businesses, I think, which again, as I said, have been suffering a little bit over the last couple of years. It all comes down with Donald Trump. It all comes down to perception and to publicity. And I think he's hoping that this visit will give a boost of publicity to his golf courses. I'm not sure how successful that will be.
This fleeting visit to the UK may be a moment of relief for Donald Trump, and he will hope boost his business's bottom line. There are, though, plenty of questions for him back home as he battles to get back into the White House. Conor Gillis, Sky News, Aberdeenshire.
Now, they're not the names you'd imagine would have been invited to the last coronation, but Lionel Richie plus Ant and Dec have been confirmed as among the congregation for King Charles's big day. Some of those lucky enough to have attended 70 years ago have been speaking to our royal correspondent, Laura Bundock.
We were brought back from the Suez Canal to line the route for the Queen.
It was the scale of the thing which made it special.
And she was radiant and she was dedicated. You could see in her face she's come to do something really, really serious.
Millions watched the last coronation, but a few had a unique view. Anne Harris was 17 and sat in a grandstand right outside the Abbey.
The first we knew anything was about to happen, apart from the clock, was the beginning of a rumble of noise which got louder and louder. It was like a big wave of cheering coming up.
Inside the Abbey was Richard Watts, a 9-year-old chorister.
And after the fanfare, we started to sing I Was Glad. And the Queen then steps forward and slowly goes up in procession. We knew the Queen was beneath us when the Westminster School boys sang the Vivats. And then we responded with a full choir and organ version of the Vivats.
After the coronation, the procession, and lining the route was Victor Needham Crofton.
It was a proud moment for me. You know, I always did like dressing up.
He remembers the crowds and the rain.
Pouring rain every single minute of the day, but I didn't care. My Queen was going to be on the throne, and I loved it.
So this is you on your way to Buckingham Palace?
Yeah.
The heavy rain almost cancelled the fly past.
If the cloud base was down to about 1,000 or 1,500 feet, it was too dangerous.
But as his logbook shows, Terry Devey Smith did take off.
And so there's the palace over there. So, of course, one could just look up.
So you had a quick look?
Oh, of course. I bet everyone did.
As the pilots looked down, the royal family looked up. And 70 years on, Charles will be back. Only this time, the flypasts for him. Laura Bundock, Sky News.
Excitement is building in Liverpool and across Europe ahead of this month's Eurovision Song Contest. Liverpool might be hosting only because last year's winners Ukraine can't. But today a festival began in the city which will ensure that the embattled nation is not forgotten, showcasing collaborations between UK and Ukrainian artists. Sky's Fraser Maud reports.
Sequins, Stardust and Sandy Shaw songs. It can only mean one thing: Eurovision's in town. And as part of the build-up, this performance of memories and music from the world's most famous song contest is touring care homes in Liverpool.
Does everyone love a bit of Eurovision?
I think so. I certainly do. And I think bringing the party out to residents in care homes and nursing homes is really important for those people who really can't participate in the party that's happening in town. We decided to bring the party to them.
At Peerhead, the preparations are well underway for the first Eurovision in the UK for 25 years, with the creation of a Eurovision village.
It's fantastic. It's actually unknown. I know when you think so much of Liverpool has done with the culture, with the music.
Shows off the city for what it is, you know, and puts us around the world, doesn't it? Even more so.
Why do you love Eurovision?
I think it's really good to see all the music and like really brilliant people singing.
There's so many different people here who are appreciating what Liverpool is doing, and you can actually feel the city pumping.
Ukraine is well represented in the city, a tribute to the country which won the contest but is unable to host it. It includes installations like these Soloveyko songbirds, the national bird of Ukraine.
It's important for us to talk about what's actually happening over there, but also to bring some positive stories about Ukraine too.
Thousands of fans missed out on tickets for the semi-finals and final live shows, but they'll be well served by the many official and unofficial parties around the city.
There's bars doing kind of Ukrainian cocktails, there's a whole food programme with Ukrainian food. Here in the village, there'll be a whole Ukrainian kind of village set up over there that will showcase the best of everything creatively about Ukraine. So we're really determined on that. But yeah, the city absolutely knows how to party.
So it's no longer the time for making your mind up about the event. It's already here. And this city of music is going to make sure it goes with a boom banger bang. Fraser Maud, Sky News, Liverpool.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers and the press preview, including this story on the front page of The Eye. Their headline, "This can't go on. NHS leaders in despair," they say, as strike stalemates hits a care backlog. And tonight, we'll be joined by the columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the former Conservative Special Advisor, Salma Shah.